Amelia's hands trembled as her husband's blow sent her sprawling across the barn floor. She never expected her quiet mare to suddenly lunge between them, determined to defend her. Amelia's heartbeat thundered in her ears as she pressed her back against the faded wooden wall of the small barn. Outside, the sky was awash with gold and violet hues, yet she could barely see the beauty of the dusk. All she could sense was the impending dread that came from the house just across the dirt yard. It was early summer, and the fragrance of wildflowers still floated on the warm breeze, but within Amelia's chest, only tension and fear coiled. She inhaled shakily, trying to gather the courage to step away from her hiding spot. A mere 5 years ago, she had believed in a fairy tale version of marriage, a promise that love would conquer all. When she first met Jacob, he had seemed warm and charismatic, the kind of person who would smile and instantly put others at ease. They had courted under the shade of centuries-old oaks on her grandfather's ranch, exchanging stolen kisses and heartfelt vows to cherish one another. Amelia remembered her father's skeptical expression as she'd left the family farm on that crisp autumn morning, suitcase in hand, determined to build a new life. She had no inkling that this new life would become a prison fashioned by her husband's dark temper. Over the years, Jacob's affection transformed into a smothering possessiveness. He began to isolate her from old friends, peppering each conversation with a subtle dig about how they didn't truly care for her. The farm they bought together slowly shifted from a place of shared dreams to an isolated patch of land where Jacob's criticisms echoed in every corner. Amelia lost track of how many times she told herself it was just stress, that he was under pressure from bills, from harvest failures, from the relentless demands of the land. But the day he raised his hand to her for the first time, over a trivial disagreement about a broken fence, Amelia's illusions shattered. She gazed at the bruises on her arms whenever she washed dishes or bent down to tend the small vegetable patch. Each time, she would close her eyes and remember how Jacob's voice sounded that day, cold, clipped, utterly unlike the sweet lullaby of his old flattery. She wore long sleeves to hide the marks, too ashamed to tell her parents that their once gallant son-in-law had turned into a merciless tormentor. Over time, it got worse. A slap turned into a beating. A shouted insult escalated into a vile tirade that left her trembling at night. Through it all, she told herself that she just needed to endure, that maybe Jacob would find his way back to the man he once was. She thought about leaving 100 times, but money was tight and his eyes were constantly on her. Whenever Jacob stomped out to the fields to check on the battered fences or to the small stable they'd built, Amelia felt brief reprieves from the tension inside the house. Yet those moments weren't nearly enough. Trapped, ashamed and terrified, she found the only solace she had in the single horse that grazed behind the barn, a spirited mare named June. June was a sturdy chestnut horse with a gentle gaze and a heart that seemed to sense Amelia's anguish. Amelia had purchased her as a mare of moderate lineage, nothing special in the eyes of serious breeders. But from the moment she arrived, June exuded a calm aura that felt almost human in its compassion. Amelia spent any spare minute she could muster brushing June's glossy coat, whispering secrets she couldn't tell a soul, and finding a strange sense of safety whenever she pressed her face into that warm neck. In the gloom of her life, the horse's presence was a single bright spot. On this particular evening, Amelia had brought a fresh bundle of hay to June, wanting to linger a while longer in the stable rather than return to the house. She knew Jacob would be waiting, half drunk probably. He had been in one of his rages that morning, cursing over a piece of farm equipment that refused to work. The memory of his fist slamming down onto the old oak table echoed in her mind. She had tried to speak calmly, to offer suggestions, but he'd only sneered at her, calling her useless. Standing in the barn, Amelia listened to the muffled sound of Jacob's footsteps prowling across the porch. Her heart fluttered like a trapped bird. She wondered if he would pass out before noticing her absence, but deep down, she knew better. The late sun was casting its last orange beams across the dusty yard. From inside the barn, she could see June flicking her tail, untroubled by the tension that thickened the air. Carefully, Amelia stroked the horse's soft muzzle, trying to absorb some of June's peacefulness. "I'll be right back," she whispered, though she half wished she never had to return. "Wish me luck." June nickered softly, as though offering comfort in a language only they shared. Amelia steeled herself and stepped out of the barn, crossing the short distance to the house. Each footfall felt heavier than the last. The screen door squeaked as she eased it open, revealing the dimly lit interior where Jacob's voice snapped through the silence. "Where were you?" he barked, his words slurred. A half-empty bottle sat on the table. The smell of cheap whiskey hung in the air. His eyes, bloodshot and narrowed, followed Amelia's every movement as she attempted to slip into the living room. I was feeding June," she said quietly, setting her jaw in a vain attempt to look composed. "A horse won't pay our bills," Jacob scoffed, rising unsteadily from the chair. "You spend too much time with that animal. You don't do a damn thing around here." Amelia felt her anger spark, but fear kept it in check. She tried to keep her tone steady. "I do my best, Jacob. I take care of the house, the yard, the meals, everything." He advanced, and his breath stank of alcohol. "You think I'm a fool? You just laze around while I bust my back to keep this place afloat. Some partner you are." His words dripped with contempt. Amelia's heart clenched, but she didn't dare argue. She had seen that glare too many times to risk provoking him. When his hand suddenly cracked across her cheek, time seemed to slow. She toppled sideways, catching herself against the wall. Pain flared hot across her face, but she swallowed her cry, focusing on steadying her breath. His voice thundered. "Didn't I tell you to stay inside tonight?" "You never listen." In that moment, a potent cocktail of shame, terror, and anger surged through her veins. She tried to speak, but he grabbed her arm, yanking her toward him. She felt her pulse roar in her ears like a storm-tossed sea. The ring on his finger dug into her skin as he dragged her back toward the kitchen, muttering vile curses. Her ribs ached from past bruises, and she stumbled, trying to maintain balance. Somehow, in a dizzy blur, Amelia managed to twist free of his grip. She dashed for the back door, tears threatening to spill down her cheeks, but her mind was focused on only one goal: escape. She shoved the screen door open and ran outside, ignoring the slice of pain that traveled up her calf when it banged against the threshold. The yard spread before her, the barn lit faintly by the remnants of the evening glow. She heard Jacob's furious shout from behind, but she didn't turn around. Her bare feet slapped the cool earth, carrying her toward the only refuge she knew. The barn smelled of hay and safety when she burst inside, chest heaving. She spun around, frantic, and saw Jacob's silhouette in the doorway. Behind her, June stirred, lifting her head in alarm at the sudden commotion. Amelia stumbled back until she felt the stall door press against her spine. Jacob's face twisted with a drunken sneer as he stepped forward, one hand raised as if to strike her. She braced herself for the blow. Before he could swing, June let out a powerful snort and pushed at the stall latch with her muzzle. The sound made Jacob pause, glancing sideways, too intoxicated to sense the danger. In a flash of movement, June's front hoof slammed into the barn floor as she forced the stall gate open, a display of raw strength that Amelia had never seen in the gentle mare. The gate banged against the wall, startling Jacob enough that his rage contorted into confusion. Then it happened. June lunged forward, positioning herself between Amelia and Jacob, ears laid flat against her skull, eyes blazing with a fierceness that contradicted her usually calm demeanor. Jacob stumbled backward, clearly rattled by the mare's sudden aggression. It was as if June had read the terror in Amelia's eyes and answered with her own form of protection. He stammered something incoherent, but June advanced another step, her large body a barrier that refused to yield. In that tense moment, Amelia realized with a jolt of astonishment that the horse was defending her. She saw the muscle definition in June's legs, the quiver of adrenaline across her flanks, and the unyielding resolve in her eyes. It was a silent standoff between a furious man and a creature driven by loyalty. Amelia's breath caught in her throat as she witnessed the transformation in June. There was no doubt the horse was ready to strike again if Jacob made one more move. Rage flared in him, but even in his drunken state, he recognized real danger. For several heartbeats, neither man nor mare flinched. Then Jacob spat at the ground, snarling, "Stupid animal," before staggering out into the yard. The barn door slammed behind him, leaving Amelia trembling in a surreal hush. She sank to her knees, her cheek throbbing, her entire body trembling as the rush of adrenaline subsided. June stood over her, nostrils flared, flank damp with perspiration. Slowly, the mare's ears relaxed, and she bent her head to nudge Amelia's shoulder. Tears finally broke free, streaming down Amelia's face as she buried her hand in June's mane. The mare's breathing was heavy and warm against her neck, a comforting reminder that in this darkness, she was not alone. In the distance, she heard Jacob's boots crunch on gravel as he stomped toward the house. Her thoughts spiraled. Had June's intervention crossed a dangerous line? How would Jacob react tomorrow? And what was Amelia supposed to do now that she had seen her husband's violence escalate, only to be met by a horse's unwavering defense? In that embrace of woman and mare, under the soft lamplight of the barn, something shifted in Amelia's heart. She knew that life as she knew it could never go back to what it was. The boundary had been broken, the truth of Jacob's brutality laid bare. And June, magnificent, resolute June, had shown a courage that Amelia herself had long believed was lost. She stroked the mare's neck, still crying, still shaking, yet feeling a flicker of hope she'd barely recognized before. The question now, the question that pounded in her chest, was whether she could transform that spark into the flame of freedom she so desperately needed. In the hush that followed, Amelia clung to June's neck as her tears subsided into ragged breaths. Her cheek throbbed from Jacob's blow, yet her heart pounded with a strange new determination. She gazed into June's dark eyes and realized that the mare had risked everything to stand up for her. The significance of that act sparked a flicker of courage in Amelia's chest. She pressed her forehead against the horse's muzzle, inhaling the warm scent of hay and equine sweat. For the first time in months, she could imagine a life without the constant bruise of Jacob's anger. Night fell quickly. Amelia had to decide whether to slip back into the house or remain in the barn. Fearful of aggravating Jacob further, she chose a compromise. She'd stay nearby, out of sight, until his drunkenness subdued him. She nestled into a corner of the barn, straw poking at her thin sleeves, and pulled an old blanket over her shoulders. June's comforting presence steadied her frayed nerves. Each time the house's back door slammed or a muffled curse sounded, Amelia tensed. But the night mostly passed in silence. Eventually, exhaustion overtook her, and she slipped into a restless sleep. At dawn, the bruised sky lightened, revealing the worn boards of the barn and the dust motes swirling in the early rays. Amelia woke with a stiff ache in her neck and shoulders, an echo of the anxiety she'd endured through the night. Softly, she rose and brushed straw off her skirt. She checked on June, who seemed calm, nibbling on a tuft of leftover hay. A pang of gratitude washed over Amelia. She reached for a brush and stroked the mare's coat, whispering soft thanks. In that gentle morning quiet, she resolved that things couldn't remain as they were. For the next few days, Amelia trod lightly around Jacob, hoping to avoid conflict. She managed the household chores with unwavering precision, careful not to trigger his ire. Yet tension simmered beneath every interaction. Whenever Jacob's gaze flitted over her bruised cheek, he said nothing. His silence felt more dangerous than insults. At night, he stalked off to the living room, whiskey glass in hand, sometimes muttering curses at the television. Amelia wondered if he recalled how June had challenged him, or if he was simply biding his time. She dared not ask. Fear gnawed at her every waking moment. Surprisingly, June's bravery had emboldened Amelia in subtle ways. She found herself speaking in firmer tones, refusing to shrink under Jacob's glare when he demanded trivial tasks. She even ventured to the nearby general store by herself, something Jacob had tried to forbid. The walk offered a momentary reprieve, the countryside humming with cicadas and fluttering birds. Standing in the store's aisle, she realized she was trembling, not from fear of Jacob, but from the realization that she was tasting freedom, however brief. Upon returning, she half expected an outburst. Instead, he simply grumbled and snatched the groceries without comment. One afternoon, while Jacob fussed over a broken tractor part, Amelia quietly led June out to the pasture behind the barn. She closed the wooden gate, letting the mare roam free among the tall grass. The sun beat down on the rolling field, illuminating June's chestnut coat with a halo of light. Amelia sank onto the grass, her arms wrapped around her knees. In that open space, she felt a hint of courage stirring. How could she stay in a home where violence lurked around every corner? The echo of June's defiance reminded her that even a gentle heart could fight back. She began to form a plan. Late at night, when Jacob's snores rattled through the thin walls, she would tiptoe to the kitchen table and scribble notes. She counted the money she had tucked away in an old coffee tin, hidden behind pots and pans. It wasn't much, but maybe enough to catch a bus if she could get to the nearest station. The real question was whether she could leave June behind. The thought made her chest tighten. After everything the mare had done, abandoning her felt cruel. Then again, how could she possibly transport a full-grown horse unnoticed? Doubts plagued Amelia. She pictured herself arriving at her parents' ranch, battered and alone, having left her beloved horse in Jacob's clutches. Whenever she entertained the idea of fleeing with June, the logistics seemed impossible. She would need a trailer, a truck capable of hauling the animal, and a safe place to keep her. But in the flickering hours of midnight, she dared to believe that someone might help. Perhaps her old childhood friend Claire, whose family owned a neighboring farm, could be an ally. Amelia hadn't spoken to her in months, thanks to Jacob's controlling nature, but hope flickered. When the weekend arrived, Jacob drove to the next county, mumbling something about a tractor auction. He left early, the tailpipe of his aging pickup sputtering as he disappeared down the long dirt road. The moment he was gone, Amelia felt a surge of relief. She hurried to the phone and dialed Claire's number, heart pounding. They hadn't spoken in ages, but Claire's warm voice greeted her with a mix of surprise and concern. Upon hearing Amelia's unsteady tone, Claire asked, "Are you all right?" The tenderness of that simple question nearly broke Amelia's composure. She cleared her throat and whispered, "I need help." They agreed to meet at a secluded clearing next to a winding creek that bordered both their properties. Claire proposed they keep the meeting quiet. She knew Jacob's reputation well enough, having heard rumors of his temper. Amelia brought June along, leading the horse through a narrow path shielded by tall pines. Her heart raced with each step, terrified Jacob might return unexpectedly. The forest canopy rustled with the wind, and Amelia was thankful for the cover it provided. Eventually, she spotted Claire's silhouette by the water. She wore jeans and a flannel shirt, her posture rigid with concern as Amelia approached. Face to face with her old friend, Amelia felt relief and shame collide. Tears welled in her eyes as she recounted the bruises, the nights spent cowering, and June's improbable act of protection. Claire listened without interruption, her expression growing more severe with every word. "We have to get you out," Claire said fiercely once Amelia finished, "and we have to take her too." She gestured at June, who had lowered her head to graze. Amelia hesitated, tears spilling onto her cheeks. "I'm scared," she admitted. Claire placed a hand on her shoulder, voice resolute. "I know. But you're not alone." They hammered out the details, voices hushed as though the pine trees themselves might betray their plan. Claire had access to her father's horse trailer and truck. She offered to come by under cover of darkness in a few days, when Jacob was likely to be out late drinking. Amelia's role would be to pack her essentials and quietly lead June to the road that cut through the edge of their property. Once they met, they would drive to Claire's place, where Amelia could stay until she figured out a more permanent solution. The more they discussed it, the firmer Amelia's resolve grew. As the sun sank lower, Claire embraced Amelia tightly, then left in her own pickup to avoid raising suspicions. Amelia led June back along the secret path, adrenaline sparking with every twig snap underfoot. When they reached the barn, she spent long minutes stroking June's mane. She felt a swirling mix of dread and determination. Jacob could return at any moment, but she was no longer paralyzed by that knowledge. Hope, fragile yet fierce, had taken root in her heart. The world might still feel perilous, but she had a plan, and she had June. Ultimately, together, they would fight for freedom, no matter the cost. Over the next few days, every rustle of wind across the fields set Amelia's nerves on edge. She lived in constant dread of Jacob's looming presence and the knowledge of the plan forming behind his back. The small slip of paper with Claire's phone number was tucked carefully inside the coffee tin where Amelia kept her meager savings. Whenever she glanced at it, her heart pounded in both fear and anticipation. At mealtimes, Jacob mostly ate in silence, gulping down beer or whiskey instead of speaking. Sometimes, his clouded gaze lingered on her as though he sensed an unspoken secret, but he never voiced his suspicions aloud. Amelia stayed cautious, moving through chores methodically, minimizing eye contact. She knew better than to provoke him. A strange heaviness permeated the air. Amelia found herself checking the horizon often, praying she wouldn't see the telltale dust trail of Jacob's truck, returning earlier than expected. The battered clock in the kitchen ticked away time like a slow drip of water. Soon, she reminded herself, soon she and June would be free. At night, she lay awake, drifting into shallow dozes, her mind full of escape routes and alternative plans in case something went wrong. June, ever faithful, seemed to sense Amelia's anxiety. Each morning, the mare waited at the stall door, ears perked, calm gaze watching Amelia's every move. 2 days before the planned escape, Jacob arrived home at noon, his boots caked with clay and his brow glistening with sweat. He stomped into the kitchen and announced he'd be heading to a friend's place that evening for a poker game. Amelia's chest tightened. If he decided to stay out late, maybe this was the window she needed, but the plan with Claire wasn't set for another night. Could she adjust last minute? She forced her voice to remain steady as she asked, "When will you be back?" Jacob shrugged. running a hand through his unkempt hair. "Who knows? Don't wait up." That typically meant an all-night affair, complete with whiskey, cigarette smoke, and simmering resentments. Amelia considered calling Claire to see if they could move faster, but the risk of tipping Jacob off was too high. She steeled herself and decided to stay the course, resisting the temptation to rush. Instead, she used the free hours to pack more essentials, trying to keep everything small enough to carry unnoticed. Into an old canvas bag went a change of clothes, a few photographs from happier times, and a worn notebook containing recollections of her childhood. She also slipped in a short letter she'd drafted for her parents, in case she needed them to understand why she fled so abruptly. While she carefully folded her mother's patchwork quilt, a pang of longing hit her. Would her parents forgive her for staying silent so long? She didn't know. But the shame of her bruises had muzzled her for too many months. That evening, the sky bled into a brilliant pink and tangerine sunset. Jacob sped off, just as the first stars peeked through the twilight. Amelia stood on the porch, her heart hammering as his truck disappeared in a swirl of dust. She allowed herself a trembling sigh of relief. This was a practice run, she thought, an opportunity to see if she could move about without raising suspicion. She hurried to the barn and saddled June, deciding to ride the mare through the back pasture where no one was likely to notice. June seemed eager, sensing Amelia's subdued excitement. The moment they exited the barn, the warm air fluttered against Amelia's cheeks. She felt the tension in her shoulders ease slightly. She'd forgotten the simple joy of riding with no fear. Under the glow of the setting sun, she guided June through the open field, grass swishing around the mare's fetlocks. Dusk settled in, and the crickets began their nightly chorus. For a fleeting moment, Amelia felt almost happy. She reined June to a stop near a large oak tree, letting the horse graze. In the distance, the silhouette of their small farmhouse looked eerily peaceful. It was hard to believe that behind those walls, so much anger lurked. When she returned to the barn, she dismounted and rubbed June down carefully, speaking in hushed tones. "One more night, girl," she whispered, brushing the mare's flank. "We just have to hold on." June exhaled softly, as though understanding. Once she was settled, Amelia crept back into the house, half expecting Jacob to have returned early. But the living room was dark, the only sound the steady hum of the old refrigerator. She tiptoed to her bedroom and locked the door behind her, leaning against it as waves of exhaustion came crashing down. She wondered if she would ever rest easy again. Hours later, just before dawn, she finally fell into a fitful sleep. The following morning, Amelia woke with an undercurrent of dread. She tidied the kitchen as usual, frying eggs and bacon in a battered cast-iron skillet. The aroma filled the house, but Jacob barely glanced at the plate she set in front of him. He looked pale, hungover, and moody. "I lost at cards," he muttered, stabbing at the eggs with his fork. Amelia responded only with a soft hum, knowing better than to pry. While he ate, she began sweeping the floor, heart pounding. Tonight was the night. Claire would be waiting around midnight near the rutted dirt road that cut through the southern edge of their property. By late afternoon, clouds started to gather. A distant rumble of thunder vibrated the windows, and Jacob cursed, complaining that a storm would ruin his plans to inspect a backfield. Amelia silently willed the rain to hold off at least long enough for them to make their escape. All evening, she moved about the house with mechanical efficiency, preparing a simple soup for dinner and making sure she left no trace of her concealed belongings. Jacob slurped his meal, muttered something about how worthless the farmland was becoming, then retreated to the sofa with a fresh bottle of liquor. Amelia watched the clock in the kitchen tick away the minutes. 11 o'clock arrived. Jacob had fallen into a restless doze, the empty bottle rolling off the coffee table onto a stained rug. Outside, the wind picked up. A flash of lightning illuminated the yard, casting eerie shadows across the barn. Amelia's stomach churned with a mix of panic and hope. She retrieved the canvas bag from its hiding spot beneath the sink, clutching it close. One final glance at Jacob told her he was out cold, his mouth slack, his snores heavy. She crept toward the back door, exhaling in relief when it didn't squeak. Rain started to patter on the roof, and thunder rumbled again in the distance. Amelia moved across the yard in near darkness, guiding herself by faint streaks of lightning. The barn's doors groaned softly as she eased them open and slipped inside. June stood in her stall, ears pricked forward. With trembling hands, Amelia readied the mare. She didn't saddle her this time, wanting to reduce the noise. Instead, she used a simple halter and lead rope, whispering, "We're going. We're really going." Her voice shook. She could only pray the weather would remain mild enough for safe travel. Together, they slipped out into the stormy night. The wind whipped Amelia's hair around her face, rain soaking through her thin coat. She felt June's muscles tense against the sudden chill. The plan was to keep to the edge of the property, following a narrow path between the fields and the tree line until they reached the dirt road. Claire would be waiting with her father's truck and trailer, the engine off to avoid drawing attention. Step by careful step, Amelia led June away from the farmstead. She jumped at every flash of lightning, terrified that Jacob might wake and realize she was gone. At last, they reached a clearing bordered by a weather-beaten fence. Through the sheets of rain, Amelia spotted a set of headlights flickering once. Claire. Relief coursed through her so fiercely that her knees nearly buckled. She guided June toward the truck, the mare's hooves squelching in the wet ground. Claire jumped out, her hair plastered to her face by the downpour. Wordlessly, she opened the trailer's door. Amelia coaxed June up the ramp. The mare's ears flicked anxiously, but she followed without protest. Once the gate was secured, Claire grasped Amelia's hands. "You made it," she whispered. Her eyes shone with worry. "Let's go before he notices." They clambered into the cab, water dripping onto the seats. Claire turned the key, and the truck sputtered to life. A flash of lightning revealed Amelia's pale, drawn face. She glanced toward the distant farmhouse one last time. A swirl of conflicting emotions, regret, sorrow, liberation, tugged at her. Then, with a groan of the engine, they started down the dirt road. Rain hammered the windshield, thunder rolled, and each second felt precarious. But Amelia's mind was already shifting to a future free from Jacob's fists. June, safe in the trailer, had carried her courage out of that bleak homestead at last. They drove deeper into the storm, the headlights carving ghostly tunnels through the rain. Neither woman spoke much. The tension was too thick. Amelia gripped the seat, half expecting Jacob's truck to roar up behind them at any moment. But the road remained empty, and the storm soon concealed any sign of their escape. A few miles later, the battered sign marking the boundary of Claire's property loomed out of the darkness. Claire turned onto a gravel lane, the tires crunching softly. When they finally parked by a spacious, weathered barn, Amelia let out a trembling breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Claire cut the engine, and the two women sat there shivering, hearts pounding in unison. Lightning still streaked across the sky, but now it felt more like a distant threat than an immediate terror. In the trailer, June whinnied, sensing the shift. With a fierce sense of gratitude, Amelia turned to Claire, voice quivering with relief. "Thank you, I couldn't have done this alone." Claire squeezed her hand. "You're safe now," she whispered. Amelia swallowed, not entirely certain what safe would look like in the days to come, but for the moment she allowed herself to believe it. Outside the barn, the rain began to slow, leaving only a gentle patter against the tin roof. Amid the echoes of thunder, Amelia closed her eyes, listening to June's occasional hoof step in the trailer. Tomorrow, everything would change. But for tonight, she had crossed a threshold of fear, guided by the unwavering loyalty of the horse that refused to let violence stand unchallenged. Claire hopped out of the truck first, the gravel crunching beneath her boots as she hurried to open the trailer doors. Amelia followed, still shivering from the damp chill that clung to her clothes. She could feel her pulse hammering in her neck, the lingering echo of adrenaline twisting her stomach in knots. The barn lights illuminated the surrounding puddles, each reflecting a glimmer of the storm's receding fury. Rivulets of rain trickled off the eaves, plunking into muddy puddles at their feet. Inside the trailer, June shifted uneasily, hooves scraping against the metal floor. Amelia moved to reassure the mare, her voice breathless and hushed. "Easy, girl. We're safe." She allowed her palm to rest on June's flank, feeling the tension in the horse's taut muscles. With practiced calm, she guided the mare down the short ramp. Claire led them across the gravel lot to her family's barn, the old wooden door sliding open on squeaking rails. The barn was warm and lit by a single overhead bulb that dangled from a beam. Rows of empty stalls stretched out in neat lines, the scent of hay and leather soothing Amelia's frayed nerves. She followed Claire to one of the stalls near the back, where fresh bedding had been laid. June tossed her head as they entered, but Amelia stroked her neck, whispering reassurance. Once the mare was inside, they removed the halter and tossed it over the stall door. June stood quietly, ears alert as though taking in her new surroundings. Amelia couldn't stop the swell of gratitude she felt. June was safe here, at least for the moment. A sudden wave of exhaustion swept over Amelia. In the quiet barn, her body finally registered the tumult of the past days, the planning, the fear, the frantic escape in the storm. She slumped against the stall door, pressing a hand to her forehead. Claire gently placed an arm around her shoulders. "Come on," she murmured. "You need rest, and I have a spare room." Leaving June to settle in, they stepped outside, where the patter of rain had diminished to a light drizzle. The farmhouse glowed at the top of a small slope, a welcoming beacon in the dark. Lightning flickered far off on the horizon, but the worst of the storm had passed. Amelia trudged beside Claire, each footstep weighted with relief and uncertainty. The yard was quiet, save for the wind brushing through the tall grass and the distant drip of water from the gutters. When they reached the porch, Claire paused, turning to look at Amelia. "Are you sure you want to stay here for now?" she asked softly. "We can call your parents. Maybe they'll come pick you up in the morning." Amelia swallowed the knot in her throat. Shame and longing warred within her. How desperately she wanted to see her parents, to feel her mother's arms around her, but she dreaded the conversation that would follow. Her explanations for staying silent, her failure to ask for help sooner. "Maybe in a day or two," she finally said. "I need to get my bearings first." Claire nodded in understanding and led her into the house. The interior smelled of lavender and wood polish. Claire's family had renovated parts of the farmhouse, but the cozy living room still featured worn plaid couches and shelves crammed with family photos. Amelia's eyes flitted over pictures of Claire's parents, who had once been close with her own. She couldn't help remembering simpler days when their fathers would chat about harvests while the two girls giggled in the background. Now, the hush of night pressed in, loaded with unspoken regrets. Claire guided her upstairs to a small guest room. The wallpaper bore floral patterns faded from years of sunlight, and a soft quilt lay folded at the foot of the bed. "You can borrow my pajamas?" Claire offered, rummaging through a nearby dresser. She handed Amelia a set of warm flannel bottoms and a t-shirt. "Bathroom's down the hall. I'll grab a towel." As Amelia closed the door behind her, she let out a quivering sigh. She was away from Jacob, truly away, and the weight of that realization made her knees threaten to buckle again. She changed into the offered clothes and caught a glimpse of her reflection in the small mirror. Her eyes were rimmed with exhaustion, her cheeks slightly bruised, her hair still damp and tangled. For a moment, a surge of guilt twisted her stomach. She had left everything behind. Would Jacob retaliate somehow? She pushed the thought aside. "Focus on now," she told herself, forcing her shoulders to relax. She heard a soft knock, then Claire stepped in with a towel and a glass of water. Amelia murmured her thanks, sinking down on the edge of the bed. Claire sat beside her, hands clasped in her lap. "How are you feeling?" Amelia stared at her friend's earnest face. The question felt too vast to answer. She settled on honesty. "Terrified," she whispered, voice cracking. "But relieved." Her eyes glistened with fresh tears she'd been struggling to hold back. "I was so scared we'd get caught, that he'd wake up and come after us." Claire gently squeezed Amelia's hand. "You're here. That's what matters. We'll figure out the rest." Her tone was steady, a promise that they weren't facing this alone. "Do you want to call anyone right now? The police or maybe a counselor?" A brief tremor coursed through Amelia's body. She glanced at her bruised cheek in the mirror, then shook her head. "I can't deal with the police yet. I'm not ready, and I don't have proof. He'll deny everything." She swallowed hard, recalling how Jacob had once threatened to twist any story she told. "I just need time. Maybe my parents can help me navigate things." Claire nodded softly. "Take it at your own pace, but don't wait too long. You deserve protection." Her eyes flicked to Amelia's arms, where faint bruises lingered like shadows of old misery. "You promise you'll think about it?" "I promise," Amelia said, her voice barely audible. With that, Claire stood and dimmed the bedside lamp. "Get some rest. I'll be in the next room if you need me, and we'll check on June in the morning." She gave Amelia a gentle hug, then slipped out, leaving the door slightly ajar. Alone in the quiet, Amelia lay down, mind churning with questions of tomorrow. Could she remain hidden here indefinitely? Should she find a job in town, earn enough to start fresh somewhere far away? What about her parents? They would surely be frantic with worry if they learned the truth of her situation. For so long, shame had kept her silent. Now, the past had cracked wide open. She pressed a hand over her heart, feeling the beat slow as sleep tugged at her. The last thing she saw was a faint strip of moonlight shining through the curtains, illuminating floating specks of dust in the still air. The next morning arrived with the aroma of coffee wafting up the staircase. Amelia stirred, blinking in the soft daylight that streamed through the window. For a split second, she forgot her circumstances and almost expected Jacob's voice from the hallway. Then reality struck her, and she sat up, scanning the unfamiliar room. Remembering where she was brought a surge of relief. She dressed quickly, splashing water on her face in the small bathroom. The bruise on her cheek had begun to fade to an ugly yellow-green, a physical reminder of the life she had left behind. She wondered if it would be the last mark Jacob ever left on her. Downstairs, she found Claire in the kitchen, frying eggs on a cast-iron skillet. Claire glanced over her shoulder with a warm smile. "Morning. Sleep okay?" Amelia nodded, though she still felt half in a dream. She noticed 2 extra plates on the table and glanced around. "Where are your parents?" "Went into town early," Claire replied, turning off the burner. "They have errands to run, and they also wanted to give you space. They know a bit about what's going on, not all the details, just that you needed help." Heat rose to Amelia's cheeks. "I'm sorry," she murmured, unsure what else to say. Claire waved off her apology. Don't be. They're glad you're safe." She slid the eggs onto plates and gestured for Amelia to sit. "After breakfast, we can head to the barn and check on June. Then we can figure out how you'd like to reach your parents or plan your next steps." They ate in companionable silence, each lost in private thoughts. Amelia's appetite was meager, but she forced herself to eat, knowing she needed strength. Afterward, they pulled on boots and trudged across the yard, the grass still wet with morning dew. The storm clouds had dispersed, revealing a brilliant, crisp sky. Sunlight glanced off the barn roof, creating shifting patterns of light on the worn siding. Inside, June greeted them with a gentle nicker. Amelia's heart lightened at the sight of her horse calmly munching hay. She leaned over the stall door, pressing her cheek against June's warm neck. "Hi, beautiful," she whispered. "We're all right." June flicked an ear, unconcerned now that she was in a dry stall with fresh food. Claire stood by, letting the reunion speak for itself. Once June was brushed and watered, the two women retreated to a small tack room at the end of the barn aisle. The space smelled of leather polish and sweet feed. Claire pulled up a stool, and Amelia sank onto a bench against the wall. She noticed her friend's expression, serious but compassionate. "I'm going to ask something hard," Claire began quietly. "Have you heard from Jacob or tried to call him?" Amelia shuddered, recalling her phone left behind on the small kitchen counter, the one Jacob never permitted her to keep in her pocket. "No, I don't want to hear his voice," she confessed. "Not yet." She fiddled with a piece of baling twine on the bench. "But I keep wondering what he'll do when he realizes I'm gone. I'm scared he might come here looking." Claire pursed her lips. "We can let my parents know what to watch out for, and we can tell a few neighbors, folks who'd warn us if they see Jacob's truck. This is a tight-knit area. They won't take kindly to a man like that making trouble." Amelia's mind spun with what-ifs. Jacob's anger was unpredictable. Would he lash out blindly, or would he try to manipulate her back into his control? A chill swept up her spine at the thought. She lifted her gaze to Claire. "Thank you," she said. "I can't repay you for this." Claire placed a comforting hand on her arm. "You don't need to repay me. That's what friends do." A hint of steel edged Claire's tone. "We won't let him hurt you again." They sat in silence for a moment. Outside, a breeze stirred the grass, carrying the scent of renewed earth. Amelia breathed in, trying to steady the tremor in her hands. She pictured the long road toward healing, police reports, potential court dates, explaining everything to her parents, rebuilding her life from scratch. It all seemed overwhelming, but she looked at June in the stall, shifting contentedly, and remembered the horse's unwavering courage, that moment in the barn when June planted herself between Amelia and danger gave her a touchstone of hope. Finally, Claire stood and offered a hand. "Come on. Let's go inside and make a plan. We'll figure out how to contact your parents. And if you want, we can get an old phone of mine hooked up, so you have a way to call for help if necessary. No pressure, okay?" Amelia rose, her legs steadier than they'd been the night before. "Okay," she whispered, "let's do it." As they left the barn, Amelia cast one last glance at June. Their journey together had been a testament to quiet fortitude and mutual trust. Now, amid the fresh promise of morning, she dared to believe that maybe, just maybe, they were both on the path to a safer, happier place. Back inside the farmhouse, the warmth of the kitchen provided a welcome contrast to the damp chill clinging to Amelia's thoughts. She wiped her feet on the rug by the door, then followed Claire to a small den where curtains filtered in pale morning light. A pair of worn armchairs faced each other, separated by a low table stacked with magazines. Claire gestured for Amelia to sit, then hurried upstairs for a moment. When she returned, she carried an older model flip phone and a small charger. "You can use this," Claire said, handing it over. "It's not fancy, just calls and basic texts, but it's something in case you need help." Amelia turned the phone over in her hands, hesitant. The last time she'd owned a functioning phone was months ago, back when Jacob started accusing her of talking to people behind his back. She remembered the arguments, how he'd smashed her phone on the porch in a fit of rage. Now, this device felt both reassuring and strange. "Thank you," she whispered, slipping it into her pocket. Claire settled in the opposite armchair, exhaling in a thoughtful way. "We need to decide how you want to handle this," she began. "We can call your parents or the authorities, if you're up for it, or someone else you trust. Maybe a relative out of town who can take you in for a while. There are also shelters if you think that's safer." Amelia mulled over the options, her heart thudding. She thought of her father, with his gruff laugh and kind eyes, how he'd taught her to ride horses when she was just a child. And her mother, always cooking, always fussing over every detail of her life. How would they react if she appeared unannounced at their door, bruised and exhausted? She pressed her lips together, trying to push aside the shame. "I think I need to tell my parents what's happened. I owe them the truth, but I don't know how to start that conversation." Claire leaned forward, folding her hands. "They love you, Amelia. You know that, right? They'll be worried, sure, but they'll also want to help. Nobody's going to blame you for what he did." A shaky breath escaped Amelia's throat. For a long moment, she watched dust motes drift in a sunbeam near the window. "I hope you're right," she finally said. "They always liked Jacob, at least at first. He was so charming. I feel foolish that I never told them the truth." She swallowed the ache rising in her chest. "I'll call them. But if I do that, Jacob might figure out where I am, if he's been in contact with them." Claire nodded, understanding the concern. "Then maybe don't say exactly where you are. Just let them know you're safe. Ask if you can visit. If they invite you, we can drive you and June over there in a day or two. They have a stable, don't they?" Amelia's thoughts turned to the sprawling ranch where she'd grown up. Her parents had kept a few horses, as well as cows and chickens. "Yes," she said, almost smiling at a sweet memory. "Plenty of space for her to roam. She'd be happy there." A soft relief mingled with her anxiety, imagining June trotting around the paddock she herself had played in as a child. "All right," Claire said gently. "Let's do it." She reached for her own cell phone and looked at Amelia expectantly. "I can dial the number if it helps." Amelia offered a trembling nod. "Please." Her stomach twisted in knots, as though she were about to step onto a stage in front of a hostile audience. But she needed to do this. She watched as Claire's fingers tapped the screen, then handed it over. On the first ring, Amelia's pulse sped. By the second, sweat cooled on her palms. Then came a click and her father's gruff voice on the line. "Hello?" Amelia drew a shaky breath. "Daddy," she said, voice trembling. Hi, it's me." Silence stretched for a moment. Then the exhalation of breath. "Amelia, where in the world are you all right?" His voice was rough with concern, and though Amelia's eyes flooded with tears, she fought to keep her composure. "I'm safe," she managed. "I'm not at home. I left Jacob." Her words seemed to echo, as if saying them aloud made her escape real. A long pause followed, the phone crackling faintly. Amelia could almost picture her father's furrowed brow. She quickly added, "I know I should have reached out sooner. I'm sorry." Her father spoke slowly, as though struggling to rein in a dozen questions. "Are you hurt?" he asked, tension in his voice. "Is he after you?" "I'm okay," she lied gently. The bruises might have faded, but the emotional wounds were far from healed. I just couldn't stay there anymore. She heard him let out a curse under his breath. Her mother's muffled voice in the background asked who was on the line. Then he spoke again, tone resolute. "Come home, then. Wherever you are, just come home, Amelia." A fresh wave of tears welled, and she choked them down. "I want to," she whispered. "But I need a day or two to figure out how. I have June with me, and—" "You still have that mare, thank God," he interrupted. Amelia could imagine him pressing a hand to his forehead. He was always fond of horses. "Do you have a place to stay? Enough food?" "Yes," Amelia said quietly. "I'm with a friend." Her father exhaled, relief mingling with impatience. "All right, take your time if you need to, but the door's open here, you understand? Jacob won't come near you so long as I have something to say about it." Tears broke free and rolled down her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice threatened to fail, so she forced herself to end the call quickly. "I'll be in touch soon." After hanging up, Amelia pressed the phone against her chest and let out a sob that seemed to tear at her insides. Claire was by her side in an instant, arms wrapped around her in comfort. They sat like that for a while, Amelia's tears soaking the shoulder of Claire's flannel. Slowly, she calmed enough to explain the conversation. Claire didn't say much, just listened, stroking her hair like a sister might. At last, Amelia pulled back, wiping her puffy eyes. "They want me to come home," she whispered. "I didn't tell them where I am." But he sounded worried, not angry. Her chest felt lighter, as though a tight band had loosened. "I think maybe they can help me figure out the rest." Claire nodded, smiling softly. "I told you they'd be on your side." They agreed to give it another day or so before heading to her parents' ranch. That would buy enough time for Amelia to calm her nerves and for Claire to arrange transporting June. In the interim, Amelia could rest, gather her thoughts, and if she felt ready, try to decide whether to involve law enforcement. The notion still made her stomach turn. She wasn't sure if Jacob's behavior warranted charges or if she even had the proof to support them. But the faint bruise on her cheek reminded her that he might never stop, and maybe no one else could restrain him. The weight of that realization left her heart pounding in an unsettled rhythm. They spent the rest of the day on small tasks that helped Amelia feel more secure, reinforcing the locks on the barn doors, making sure the farm's neighbors had a picture of Jacob's truck, and creating a stash of supplies just in case. As evening approached, Claire's parents returned with curious looks and kind words, but they didn't pry. Amelia couldn't bring herself to discuss her ordeal yet. She accepted their gentle offers of supper and company, grateful for their respect of her fragile emotional state. Night fell with a quiet stillness across the farm. Claire suggested Amelia join her on the back porch for a little while. They settled into a pair of old rocking chairs facing a wide expanse of pasture. The sky was a deep navy, sprinkled with stars. Crickets chirped in the long grass, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of honeysuckle. For the first time in months, Amelia could look up at the constellations without feeling caged in by fear. She rocked in silence, reliving the events of the previous day. If Jacob woke to find the barn empty, he surely knew by now that she was gone. The thought made her shiver, imagining his rage, the fists he might slam against walls. But each breath of the night air reminded her that she was no longer there to absorb his fury. She had chosen a different path. She was free to gaze at the stars, to feel the pulse of life in her own body, and not walk on eggshells every second. Claire reached over, giving Amelia's hand a gentle squeeze. "Tomorrow we'll practice loading June up so we're ready for the drive," she said, her voice calm. "I'll come with you to your parents' place, if you want." Amelia nodded. "I'd like that," she answered. quieter than the wind. Then she turned her eyes to the pasture, where she could barely make out the shape of the barn in the moonlight. "I owe June so much," she mused. "She saved me that night. I just know Jacob would have—" She swallowed, forcing the words away. "She's the only reason I found the courage to leave at all." Claire's voice was gentle. "Horses have a sense about people, don't they? She must love you a whole lot." Amelia's chest tightened with emotion. "I love her too," she whispered. "She's been my anchor in all this." They lapsed into companionable silence. Amelia savored the peace, aware that new challenges lay ahead. She would have to confront her past, and she had no guarantee of how Jacob might retaliate. But she did have her parents' support, Claire's unwavering friendship, and the steadfast devotion of a horse who refused to stand idle in the face of danger. For the first time, the future felt like a place she might choose for herself, rather than a trap she had to endure. Long after Claire went back indoors, Amelia remained on the porch, letting the chill of night breeze across her skin. The stars swirled overhead, serene and immutable, reminding her that darkness couldn't negate their light. She wrapped her arms around her knees and breathed in the moment, trusting that one step at a time she was walking toward the life she deserved, one defined by safety, self-respect, and the quiet strength she'd almost forgotten she possessed. Morning arrived in a hush of grey light, the sky tinted with hints of lavender and rose as the sun climbed over distant fields. Amelia stirred from her borrowed bed, feeling slightly more rested than before, though her dreams had been plagued by vague shadows of Jacob's anger. She inhaled the comforting scent of coffee drifting in from the kitchen and stretched, a slight ache radiating through her shoulders. After dressing, she brushed her hair back into a low ponytail and made her way downstairs. Claire was already there, pouring coffee into 2 chipped mugs and greeting Amelia with a sympathetic smile that silently asked how she was holding up. After breakfast, they decided to begin practicing how to load June into the trailer at a moment's notice. Though Amelia had ridden and cared for horses most of her life, the dread that clung to her now made everything feel uncertain. Would June sense her residual fear and balk at new routines? And if Jacob tried to track them down, could they get on the road quickly enough to evade him? The questions nagged at her as she and Claire walked across the dew-drenched lawn toward the barn. A faint tension coiled inside Amelia, though she tried to mask it with determined strides and a steady expression. In the barn, they found June munching serenely on a mound of fresh hay. The mare lifted her head upon seeing Amelia, soft eyes bright with recognition. A swelling of warmth and gratitude fluttered in Amelia's chest. No matter how dire her own anxieties, June's presence was a soothing balm, an anchor in the storm. She slipped the halter over June's head, murmuring a gentle greeting. Claire led the way outside, opening the wide double door so that Amelia could guide the mare into the yard. The truck and trailer were parked near a gravel pullout, angled for a smooth exit whenever the time came. First, Amelia walked June around the trailer, letting her sniff its metallic surface. The mare flicked her ears, cautious but not frightened. Next came the ramp, a wide piece of ridged metal that clanged slightly underfoot. June took one step, then paused, seeming to size up the echo from within the trailer's interior. Amelia patted the mare's neck, encouraging her with a few words of praise and a gentle tug on the lead. Slowly, June set her hoof more firmly onto the ramp and eased forward. By the time she reached the interior, Amelia felt a surge of pride. Her horse's trust was unwavering, and even in unfamiliar circumstances, that bond guided them both toward calm. Claire hovered nearby, offering a supportive nod each time June advanced. Once the mare was inside, they fastened the chest bar and fed her a treat, a small token to reinforce the positive moment. Sunlight spilled through the open side door, illuminating bits of dust dancing in the air. Amelia took a steady breath, reminding herself that they were taking proactive steps, that she wasn't as powerless as she had felt in Jacob's house. After a few minutes, they led June back out to the barn, repeating the routine twice more until the mare seemed entirely at ease. "That went well," Claire remarked as they rubbed June down. Perspiration glistened on the horse's coat, and Amelia noticed an answering sheen on her own forehead. "When we head to your parents' place tomorrow, it should be smooth. We'll leave early before traffic builds." She paused, and Amelia could tell her friend was weighing whether to speak her next thought aloud. "Have you heard anything from Jacob since you left?" Amelia shook her head. She touched the flip phone in her pocket, still unused. "No calls. Maybe he doesn't have my number, or maybe he's not even trying." A pang of unease tugged at her. She couldn't quite believe he would simply let her go. But she also couldn't gauge his next move. Jacob's moods and logic had grown so twisted over the past year that predicting him felt impossible. "Part of me worries he'll just show up out of nowhere," she admitted quietly. Claire laid a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We're all keeping watch. If he comes snooping around, there'll be a half-dozen people ready to run him off. But I get it. It's scary, not knowing." Her eyes shone with empathy. "Let's try to focus on the plan for now." They finished tending to June, then walked back toward the house, the mid-morning sun streaming overhead. Claire's parents were outside, chatting with a neighbor near the picket fence. Amelia felt a flush creep into her cheeks at the notion that half the county might already suspect what had happened. Yet when Claire's mother waved them over, her smile was kind and unintrusive. She offered Amelia a gentle hug and quietly asked if everything was all right. Amelia found herself nodding, grateful that no one demanded details. Inside, Claire's father had spread out a county map on the kitchen table, highlighting back roads they could take to Amelia's family ranch. "Lots of folks don't know these routes," he explained. "They're slower, but safer, in my opinion. Fewer eyes, if you get my drift." Amelia understood well enough. A wave of emotion rose in her throat as she realized how many people were quietly rallying to protect her from Jacob's potential wrath. She swallowed hard, fighting off tears. They spent the rest of the day in subdued preparation, packing extra supplies for June, mapping out bathroom stops for the nearly 2-hour trip, and arranging a time to call Amelia's parents once they were on the road. Amelia's nerves jangled the entire afternoon, especially when a phone rang or a car rumbled past on the main road. Each unfamiliar sound stoked her fear. But with Claire's steady presence, she managed to tamp it down. By evening, she was exhausted, more from anxiety than from physical tasks. Dinner was a quiet affair with Claire's parents, a simple meal of stew and cornbread. Though the conversation avoided explicit mention of Jacob, Amelia sensed that each person at the table was attuned to her unspoken tension. Their gentle questions, "How was your day?" or "Think you'll head out early tomorrow?" were all laced with understanding. Amelia replied with short, appreciative answers, her appetite too small to match the generosity of the meal. Still, she felt oddly safe, as though she were perched on the edge of a tightrope, but held steady by invisible lines of support. After clearing the dishes, Amelia drifted onto the porch. The sky overhead was streaked with sunset colors, deep orange and pink, slowly fading into purples. She rested her elbows on the railing, breathing in the scent of freshly turned earth and cut grass. In the distance, she could see the silhouette of the barn. Somewhere inside was June, probably dozing in her stall. Amelia closed her eyes, remembering how the mare had placed herself between Amelia and Jacob's fury. That memory was a jolt of both horror and awe, reminding her of what had driven her to make such a drastic change in her life. Lost in thought, Amelia didn't hear Claire approach until she felt a light tap on her arm. "I figured you could use some fresh air," Claire said softly. She held out a mug of tea, the steam curling into the twilight. "Chamomile might help you settle down tonight." "Thank you," Amelia whispered, accepting the mug. They stood side by side, sipping in companionable silence. Crickets began their nightly chorus, accompanied by the distant hoot of an owl hidden in the woods. Amelia glanced at Claire, who gazed out at the darkening sky. "You've been so patient with me," Amelia said, her voice trembling. "I don't know how to repay you." Claire shook her head, setting her mug on the railing. "Stop thinking of it as a debt," she replied gently. "What you're going through, it could happen to anybody. We're friends. I wouldn't leave you to face this alone." A tightness welled up in Amelia's throat again. She stared at the wooden boards beneath her feet, feeling emotions surge. "I keep wondering if I should call the police after all. I'm afraid of what he might do next, but I'm afraid of causing a bigger mess." Claire sighed softly. "We can talk about it on the way tomorrow. You'll be with your parents, and if you want to file a report, they can help. There's no one-size-fits-all approach to getting out of an abusive situation, but don't dismiss it if you think you need that protection." Amelia nodded. She wasn't sure she could handle the intimidation of legal procedures. Yet she also pictured Jacob, fists clenched, veins bulging at his temples. What if he came looking? She rubbed her arms, suddenly chilled despite the warmth of the summer night. "Thank you," she murmured again, her voice catching. Claire simply placed an arm around Amelia's shoulders, and together they watched the horizon fade from brilliant color to a velvety indigo. Later, Amelia returned to her guest room. She tried to read a worn paperback novel Claire had lent her, but the words blurred on the page. Instead, her thoughts circled back to the day she'd first met Jacob, how he'd charmed her with silly jokes and compliments about her riding skills. How could that man become the monster who struck her, belittled her, trapped her? A pang of grief lodged in her chest for the life she once imagined they would share. She closed the book and stared at the ceiling, acknowledging for the first time that she was grieving not just the cruelty, but the loss of a dream. Sleep stole over her in uneven fragments. She dreamt of chasing after June through an endless field where Jacob's voice echoed, calling her name in a distorted roar. She woke shivering in the early hours, then drifted off again as the shadows outside turned gray. When dawn arrived, she found herself rising with less hesitation than usual. It was time to go, time to move forward. Downstairs, Claire was already dressed in jeans and a light jacket, hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. They exchanged a wordless look of determination before heading out to load June. The sky was clear, promising a bright summer day. Birdsong filled the crisp air, and a sense of inevitability hummed through Amelia's nerves. She had pictured this moment for days now, but reality felt somehow calmer. This was the right thing to do. Together, they led June to the trailer. The mare walked up the ramp with minimal coaxing, only pausing once to sniff at a puddle. Claire's father double-checked the hitch, then clapped Amelia gently on the shoulder. "You take care now. Keep in touch. And let me know if there's anything else we can do." Amelia's throat tightened, but she forced a small, grateful smile. Then she climbed into the truck's passenger seat while Claire took the wheel. With a rumble of the engine, they pulled away from the farmstead. The morning sun glinted off the trailer's metal sides. Amelia looked back just once, meeting Claire's parents' kind waves. Then the bend in the gravel drive blocked them from sight, and Amelia turned her gaze forward, focusing on the ribbon of road leading home. As they navigated the back roads, the landscape unfurled with fields of corn and soy, the occasional dusty farmhouse, and wide-open skies. Amelia clutched the flip phone in her lap, half expecting it to ring with some dire message from Jacob, but it remained silent. The tension in her shoulders slowly eased as they passed mile after mile without incident. Clouds drifted across a cerulean sky, and Claire hummed to the radio's soft static. For a sliver of time, it felt almost like a road trip between friends, not a flight from darkness. They stopped once to stretch their legs and check on June, who nickered contentedly behind the trailer's partition. Amelia offered her a carrot, stroking the mare's muzzle. The moment felt surreal, bathed in sunshine, so different from the cold terror of that barn the night Jacob had raised his hand again. She was leaving that behind, forging a path to something unknown yet infinitely safer. With each passing minute, Amelia felt more certain she was doing the right thing. Whatever awaited her at her parents' ranch, whether it be sorrow, relief, or complicated conversations, had to be better than the life she'd endured. And she wasn't alone. Claire's quiet presence at the wheel and June's steady patience in the trailer reminded her she had allies. She had chosen love and friendship over fear and isolation. She had chosen life. After an hour of weaving along back roads, Claire steered the truck onto a narrow, tree-lined lane that led to Amelia's childhood home. Sunlight slanted through the branches overhead, creating shifting patterns on the gravel. Amelia felt her pulse quicken. She leaned forward in her seat, craning to glimpse the familiar silhouette of the house. Anxiety prickled under her skin. It had been months since she'd last set foot here, and never under such circumstances. She glanced at Claire, who offered a reassuring nod. The lane opened onto a wide clearing, revealing a sprawling farmhouse with faded white siding and a wraparound porch. A red barn stood off to one side, and a few horses grazed in the adjoining pasture. Amelia spotted the wooden swing still hanging from the ancient oak in the yard, stirring memories of carefree afternoons long past. She inhaled sharply, bracing herself. Jacob was miles behind her, hopefully not following, and it was her father's protective domain she was approaching now. They slowed to a stop near the barn. As the engine quieted, the screen door of the house banged open. Amelia's father, tall and broad-shouldered, strode across the yard with urgency. Behind him walked her mother, hands clasped at her chest. Both wore expressions of deep concern. Amelia felt tears threaten before she even opened the truck door. She forced herself to breathe, then slid out, her legs shaky from the long drive. Her father reached her first. He paused, eyes sweeping over her face as though trying to confirm she was really there. His gaze landed on the faint bruise, and a shadow of anger passed across his features. "Amelia," he said, voice thick, "you're all right." She could only nod. He pulled her into a crushing hug that smelled of hay and soap, and she buried her face against his shirt, letting out a strangled sob she didn't know she'd been holding back. Her mother joined them, wrapping arms around both. Amelia felt the warmth of her mother's embrace, the soothing familiarity of her perfume. She wanted to apologize for everything, for her silence, for the pain she'd concealed. Instead, the words jumbled in her throat and tears flowed. Neither parent pressed her for an explanation. They simply held her until the knot of tension in her chest began to loosen. After a moment, her father stepped back. He cleared his throat, glancing at Claire. "Thank you for bringing her," he said, extending a hand. Claire shook it firmly, her expression respectful. "I'm glad to help," she replied simply. They turned to the trailer, where June's soft whinny drifted through the open slats. "We brought her horse," Claire explained, nodding toward the trailer's side. "She's a calm traveler, but I'd like to get her settled soon." Amelia's father nodded. "Of course, we'll put her in the second stall, sturdy enough, and we can bring her out to the pasture later." He and Claire walked to unfasten the ramp, while Amelia's mother gently guided her toward the barn, supporting her elbow as though she might crumble at any second. As Amelia neared the barn door, she glimpsed the old tack room window, once adorned with wind chimes. The memories rushed in, the day she'd first learned to bridle a horse, her father praising her steady hands. Now she was returning as a battered adult, haunted by fear. She steeled herself. This was her safe haven, not a place of judgment. Inside, the barn smelled of fresh straw and sweet feed. In the second stall, Amelia could see a fluffy bed of shavings waiting. She stood by, leaning against the wooden wall, while Claire and her father coaxed June out of the trailer. The mare stepped onto the ramp without hesitation. Amelia half expected June to balk, given the unfamiliar surroundings, but she showed only a momentary flick of the ears before walking smoothly into the stall. Relief washed over Amelia. June was safe, and so was she. Her father closed the stall door with a reassuring click, then turned to Amelia with visible concern. "Let's get you inside," he said. His tone was gentle, but a hint of controlled fury simmered underneath. She knew that anger was directed at Jacob, and the idea of telling him everything still made her stomach knot, yet she also felt protected, like a fortress now stood between her and the life she'd fled. Claire brushed stray hay from her jeans and offered Amelia a tentative smile. "I'll help your dad unload any gear. Go on with your mom," she suggested, reading Amelia's overwhelmed expression. Amelia mouthed a silent thank you and followed her mother out of the barn. Inside the house, warmth enveloped Amelia. The living room was just as she remembered, with crocheted blankets draped over the worn sofa and old photographs lining the mantel. The subtle smell of potpourri and coffee filled the air, bringing tears to her eyes again. How many times had she longed for the familiarity of this space, while Jacob ranted in the next room or slammed doors to intimidate her? She settled onto the couch, numb. Her mother hurried into the kitchen, returning with a glass of water. "Drink," she whispered. Amelia complied, taking small sips. Her hands trembled, and she set the glass on a coaster to keep from spilling. The weight of her mother's gaze pressed heavily on her, but it carried neither judgment nor pity, only a heartfelt worry. Outside, she heard the rumble of the truck pulling away, presumably to park in a more convenient spot. Then a rush of footsteps, and her father appeared in the doorway, Claire behind him. Both looked ready to speak, but hesitated. Amelia could guess they didn't want to barrage her with questions. Eventually, her father lowered himself into the armchair opposite the couch, leaning forward with elbows on his knees. "Mia," he began, calling her by the childhood nickname that always made her feel cherished. "You don't have to tell us everything right now, but we need to know enough to help you." She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, drawing in a slow breath. "Jacob," she started, her voice cracking. "He wasn't who I thought. He was cruel. It started with little things, insults, controlling how I spent money, who I talked to. Then it got worse, physical." Her hand twitched toward her cheek. She pressed her lips together, fighting tears. "I was so ashamed. I thought I could fix it. But I couldn't." Her mother inhaled sharply. Amelia looked up to see tears in her mother's eyes. "My sweet girl, why didn't you come to us sooner?" she whispered. "We would have moved mountains to help you." Guilt lanced through Amelia. "I was scared," she admitted. "Jacob convinced me you wouldn't understand, that leaving him would make me a failure. It sounds foolish now, but I believed him." Her voice trembled as she forced out the words. "It was June who changed everything. She defended me when he tried to hit me again. That night, I realized I had to go." Silence thickened, broken only by the ticking of the clock on the wall. Claire rested a hand on Amelia's shoulder, offering solidarity. Her father stared at the floor, hands clenched. Then he rose, crossing the small space to kneel before Amelia. She saw raw anger and heartbreak in his eyes. "I swear, if that man sets foot on this property, he'll regret it," he said through gritted teeth. "Daddy," Amelia said softly, reaching to grasp his hands. "I just want to be free from him. I don't want to live in fear anymore." She felt her mother shift onto the couch beside her, the familiar arms circling around her shoulders. The closeness, the unity of her family in that moment wrapped her heart like a shield. Claire cleared her throat politely. "Do you want to call the police? Or maybe file a protection order?" she asked, glancing between Amelia and her parents. Amelia's pulse jerked. She remembered her conversation with Claire about legal action. The idea still frightened her, but if Jacob refused to let go, she might need more than words to keep him away. She looked to her parents for guidance. Her father's jaw tightened. "That's up to you, honey. But if you ask me, you have enough reason to file a restraining order at least." A lump rose in Amelia's throat. "I'll think about it," she said quietly. I don't know if I'm ready." Her mother stroked her hair. "No rush. Let's make sure you're safe and settled. We'll stand behind any decision you make." With that, Amelia felt a portion of her burden lift. They believed her, they cared, and they weren't pushing her beyond her limits. She sank against the couch cushions, relief seeping into her bones. Claire's presence was comforting, but Amelia sensed she might feel more at ease speaking to her parents alone. Claire seemed to sense this too, because she rose, excusing herself to check on June in the barn. Amelia flashed a grateful smile in her friend's direction. Alone with her parents, the conversation turned to practical concerns. Her mother insisted Amelia take the spare bedroom upstairs, refusing to allow any debate about inconvenience. They spoke about routine chores on the ranch, how they could use Amelia's help if she felt up to it, but only at her own pace. She learned that a few local ranchers had asked about her now and then, curious why she visited so rarely, but Jacob always had some excuse. Anger simmered in her father's expression at the mention of how Jacob had twisted the truth to keep Amelia isolated. Eventually, the weight of the discussion pressed on Amelia's tired mind. She realized she'd been clutching her mother's hand the entire time, reluctant to let go. Her father stood, clearing his throat. "Why don't we all get some fresh air?" he suggested. "Show her around, remind her this is home." Amelia and her mother agreed, and they headed outside. The sun had climbed higher, bathing the yard and pastures in a bright, summery glow. Birds darted across the lawn, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the old oak. As they strolled toward the barn, Amelia felt tension ease with each step on familiar ground. It wasn't a magic cure. Her inner turmoil remained, but the land itself, so tied to her upbringing, offered a sense of belonging. They found Claire by the stall, quietly talking to June, who nuzzled her outstretched hand. The sight tugged at Amelia's heart. She moved forward and slipped her palm under June's muzzle, the horse's warm breath tickling her skin. "This is where you belong too," she whispered. "We're both home now." Her parents hung back, giving her space to reconnect. After a few moments, her mother came closer. "Would you like to take her out to the pasture? We still have that open field behind the barn. She can roam there." Amelia nodded gratefully. Helping June settle in felt like the perfect first step toward her own healing. It was action, purposeful and peaceful, reminding her that, despite everything she'd endured, she could still stand strong beside her beloved mare. So, with gentle hands, Amelia led June out to the sunlit field. The horse tossed her head, nostrils flaring at the scents carried by the breeze. When Amelia slipped off the lead rope, June trotted a short distance, pausing to glance back as if inviting Amelia along. In that instant, an almost giddy surge of hope coursed through Amelia's veins. She wasn't entirely free of fear, but she was no longer alone, no longer silent. She could see the shape of a future, uncertain, but brighter than anything Jacob had tried to confine her to, and for the first time she believed she had the right to claim it. That evening, Amelia found herself standing by the fence, gazing out at June grazing under the pink-orange sky. The day had passed in a blur of conversations, quiet tasks, and gentle reassurances from her parents. They had insisted she take her old room upstairs, complete with the pastel wallpaper she once found embarrassing in her teens. Now, in her adulthood, she found it oddly comforting, an anchor to simpler times. The house itself seemed determined to soothe her, each creaking floorboard whispering that she was safe and welcome. In the field, June swished her tail, content to explore the soft grass. Amelia rested her arms on the fence rail, letting the breeze ruffle her hair. Despite her exhaustion, she couldn't bring herself to go inside just yet. After so many nights on edge, it felt foreign to stand in the open air without fear of footsteps hurrying across the yard or Jacob's voice barking accusations. The quiet lulled her into a delicate state of gratitude and worry. She breathed deeply, inhaling the scent of alfalfa and the faint musk of horse sweat. Soft footsteps approached. Amelia turned to see her father amble up, his broad shoulders silhouetted against the dusky sky. He paused beside her, clearing his throat in a gentle way. She could feel him searching for words that wouldn't pressure her. "Hey, Daddy," she said softly, a hint of a smile touching her lips. "Hey there, Mia." He draped an arm around her shoulders, gaze drifting toward June. For a moment, neither spoke. Then he shifted his stance and exhaled. "You know, I've been thinking about how best to keep you safe. I don't like that Jacob's out there, probably angry." A chill trailed down Amelia's spine. She nodded, her grip tightening on the fence. "Me neither," she admitted. "But I'm so tired of living in fear. A part of me wants to file a restraining order, and part of me just wants him to vanish from my life." Her father's jaw tightened. "I wish he'd just leave you be. But if he doesn't, we'll make sure he faces the consequences. Sheriff Hendricks is a good man. If you want me to talk to him, I will." Amelia remembered the county sheriff, a weathered figure who'd once stopped by her parents' place for coffee after a long patrol. She could still picture his lined face and steady eyes. I'm not sure yet," she said hesitantly. "It's all happening so fast, and I still feel overwhelmed. If I go that route, I want to do it on my own terms." Her father's arm squeezed her shoulders in a gentle hug. "Understood," he murmured. "This is your life. You get to decide how you handle it." He tipped his head toward June. "She looks like she's settling in fine." A genuine smile touched Amelia's lips. "She is," she agreed, following her father's gaze. "I don't know what I'd do without her." They lingered for a while, watching the sky deepen into purple. Eventually, her father patted her back and suggested they head inside for supper. Amelia followed him, glancing over her shoulder for one last look at June. The horse had lifted her head, as if sensing Amelia's departure, but soon returned to munching the abundant grass. Dinner was a quiet, comforting affair. Her mother had prepared roast chicken with potatoes, the kind of home-cooked meal Amelia hadn't tasted in ages. She picked at it more than devoured it, her appetite still dampened by nerves, but she appreciated the warmth of her parents' presence at the table. Claire had remained for the evening, invited to share a plate. Across from Amelia, she offered encouraging smiles every so often. It was a far cry from the tense, isolated meals Amelia had endured with Jacob, where every fork scrape risked a glare or a sneer. After the meal, her mother pressed her to rest, but Amelia decided a short walk around the property might soothe her overactive mind. Claire volunteered to join, so they slipped out the back door into a night that vibrated with cricket song. The moon had risen, round and luminous, casting silver light across the familiar contours of barns and fences. The two friends walked side by side along a dirt path that meandered beyond the main house. "You doing okay?" Claire asked gently, hooking her thumbs in her pockets. Amelia shrugged. "As well as I can be," she said, slowing her pace. "It feels surreal being home after all this time, like I've stepped into a memory, except I'm different now." Claire nodded in understanding. Change can be painful, but it's also a sign of growth. They passed an old tree stump, half-rotted, that Amelia remembered sitting on as a girl. Time had whittled it down, just as her experiences with Jacob had stripped away her illusions. She paused, resting one foot on the stump. "I didn't realize how much I missed this place, how it always felt safe. I guess I forgot what safety even felt like." Claire looked at her intently. "You'll rebuild that feeling," she said. "Every day you're here, surrounded by people who love you, you'll remember who you are outside of his shadow." Emotions swelled in Amelia's chest, and she swallowed against the tightness in her throat. "Thank you for everything," she whispered. "You have no idea how much it means." Claire looped an arm around her, pulling her close in a sideways hug. They strolled back under the moonlit sky, heading toward the barn to check on June one last time. The mare dozed near the fence, content after a day of grazing. Amelia reached through the rails to stroke June's mane, and the horse nickered softly in greeting. A wave of gratitude warmed Amelia from within. Before long, they parted ways for the night. Amelia's mother made up the spare bedroom for Claire, and the household settled into a hush. Amelia found herself pacing in her old room, scanning the floral wallpaper that once felt suffocating, but now provided a soothing nostalgia. She cracked open the window, letting in the soft night air. In the distance, a dog barked. She prayed it wasn't a sign of Jacob's approach, though she tried to dismiss the fear as mere reflex. Eventually, she climbed into bed, pulling the covers up to her chin. The pillows smelled faintly of lavender sachets her mother tucked away in drawers. Amelia closed her eyes, but sleep eluded her. Thoughts skittered: Jacob's potential fury, the question of legal action, the relief of being here, the guilt at letting her parents see her bruises. She forced herself to focus on June's comforting image, how the horse had stood resolutely against violence. Then at last her mind began to slow. Her dreams were less tumultuous this time. She saw glimmers of a future on the ranch, riding June across wide fields, practicing small acts of independence, like choosing what she wore without fear of ridicule. Still, she jolted awake once near midnight, heart hammering at the sound of the wind rattling a window pane. When she realized it was nothing more than a gust, she exhaled shakily and sank back into the pillow. As night drew on, exhaustion finally claimed her in earnest. Morning brought the comforting bustle of a working ranch. Amelia woke to the drone of a tractor in a nearby field. She rose quickly, splashing water on her face and dressing in clothes her mother had dug from an old closet. Downstairs, she found her parents sipping coffee, discussing chores. Her father's eyes lit with concern when he saw her, but he gave her a genuine smile. "Slept all right?" She nodded, pouring herself a cup of coffee. "Better than I have in a while," she admitted. Claire emerged soon after, hair still slightly tousled. Over breakfast, they talked in gentle circles about Amelia's next steps. No one pressured her, but she felt an unspoken question in the air. How long could she live in limbo, refusing to address the possibility of Jacob reappearing? A knock at the door made her tense, nearly spilling her coffee. Her father set down his mug and strode toward the foyer. Amelia's breath caught until she heard the low murmur of a familiar neighbor's voice. Moments later, he returned, looking grave. "What is it?" Amelia asked, her anxiety climbing. Her father cleared his throat. "Neighbor said Jacob's truck was seen driving near the county line. He wasn't causing trouble yet, but it means he's not far." His gaze flicked to Amelia, sympathy and anger etched into his features. Claire reached for Amelia's hand. "Maybe it's time to notify the sheriff, even if just informally," she said, her voice steady. "Let him know you're here and you're worried about Jacob." Amelia drew a shaky breath, picturing that battered pickup rattling across dusty roads. Had Jacob come looking, or was it a coincidence? She clenched her jaw, memories of his rage swirling at the edges of her mind, but fear of him controlling her life again was worse than the fear of speaking to the authorities. "All right," she whispered, tears pricking at her eyes. "Let's do it." "At least let the sheriff know I left him for a reason," her father nodded, expression resolute. "I'll make the call. You can talk to him if you feel up to it." With that, Amelia wiped her palms on her jeans, heart hammering. She didn't know how this day would end, but she knew she couldn't remain silent. Claire squeezed her hand, and her mother rubbed her back in support. Through the kitchen window, Amelia caught a glimpse of June's chestnut coat flickering in the sun, a reminder of the loyalty and courage that had propelled her here. And though her pulse thudded with a deep-seated dread, she felt a thread of new strength woven through her fear, enough to stand her ground, if it came to that. Her father retrieved the phone from the kitchen counter, a determined set to his mouth. Amelia's heart thudded as she watched him dial. Claire and her mother hovered nearby, offering silent support. Outside the window, a breeze swept across the fields, rustling the tall grass. It was hard to reconcile the pastoral calm of the ranch with the trepidation knotting Amelia's stomach. She caught herself clinging to the edge of the table, knuckles whitening as her father cleared his throat. "Sheriff Hendricks, this is James Donovan," he said. "I'd like to speak with you about my daughter, Amelia. She left her husband, and we have reason to believe he might come looking for her." He paused, listening intently. Then he glanced at Amelia. Concern etched into his face. "Yes, she's here now. She'd like to explain the situation." Amelia inhaled slowly. She pressed a hand to her midsection, trying to settle the fluttery feeling in her gut. Her mother squeezed her shoulder in encouragement, and Claire gave her an approving nod. Stepping forward, she took the phone, carefully schooling her voice to remain steady. "Sheriff," she began, forcing out the words in a level tone, "this is Amelia. I need you to know that I left my husband, Jacob Walker, because he's been physically and emotionally abusive. He doesn't yet know my exact location, but we've heard rumors he's nearby. I'm worried for my safety and for my family's." She paused, swallowing against the dryness in her mouth. A crackle came over the line, then the sheriff's measured voice. "I'm sorry you've had to go through that, Amelia. You did the right thing, calling me. Can you give me some details about the abuse?" His tone was gentle yet professional, reminding her of how he'd always carried himself with calm authority. She felt tears prick at her eyes. "He started controlling me, yelling a lot," she said, keeping her words concise but direct. "Eventually, he started hitting me. The last time, he tried again, and my horse intervened. That was when I fled." Even as she spoke, she found it surreal to articulate these horrors to a figure of law. Her hand shook slightly, and her mother placed a steadying palm on her back. On the other end, Sheriff Hendricks sighed. "Do you have evidence of these injuries? Medical records, photographs, or witnesses?" Amelia pressed her free hand to her cheek, recalling the bruises that had begun to fade. "Nothing official," she admitted. "I never went to a hospital, but my parents and Claire can confirm my bruises, and there might be neighbors who overheard some of the fights. I'm not sure." Her father spoke up, voice firm. "Sheriff, I've seen the marks myself." "That's proof enough for me. If Jacob shows up here, I won't hesitate to protect my daughter." Sheriff Hendricks responded with a note of caution. I understand your anger, James, but let's handle this by the book. Amelia, if you feel it's necessary, you can file a formal complaint that can lead to a restraining order. Given he's been sighted in the area, it might be wise to get something on paper as soon as possible. Amelia glanced at Claire, whose eyes shone with concern. She exhaled carefully, making her decision. "Yes," she said, voice trembling but resolute. "I'd like to file a complaint, and I want to apply for a restraining order if I can. I'm done living in fear." The sheriff's tone was approving. "Good. I can come out to the ranch later today with some paperwork for you. We'll gather your statement, see what we can do. In the meantime, keep your doors locked, and don't hesitate to call if he shows up." Relief warred with anxiety in Amelia's chest. "Thank you, Sheriff. I appreciate it." They ended the call, and her father set the phone down with careful deliberation. "He'll be here soon," he said, his shoulders sagging as though the tension of the conversation had weighed him down. Then he straightened and looked to Amelia. "You did the right thing, honey." Amelia's chest felt tight. Even taking these steps made Jacob's threat loom larger somehow, but it also strengthened her resolve. She wasn't cornered anymore. She was standing her ground. She offered a shaky smile to her parents and Claire, each of them radiating reassurance. "I'm so grateful," she murmured. "All of you. I couldn't do this alone." Her mother moved into action, fussing about the living room, tidying surfaces as if anticipating the sheriff's arrival. Claire helped pick up newspapers and mugs, while Amelia's father busied himself checking the locks on windows and doors. A subtle tension thrummed among them all, the quiet knowledge that Jacob's next move was an unknown variable. Time seemed to slow. Amelia perched on the couch, hands clasped so tightly her knuckles ached. She stared at the clock on the wall, its ticking steady and oblivious to human turmoil. Outside, the day stretched into a mild afternoon. Birds fluttered in the trees, shadows lengthened across the porch, and still no sign of Jacob. She tried to distract herself by reviewing what she might say to Sheriff Hendricks in her statement, but her mind kept wandering to the times Jacob had belittled her, the times he'd struck her, and the times she'd convinced herself it was just a phase. A knock at the door finally broke the tension. Her father looked through the window and nodded at Amelia. "It's the sheriff," he said. She felt her pulse hammer as she stood. Her mother squeezed her hand once before letting go, and Claire murmured a soft, "I'm right here." Sheriff Hendricks stepped inside with a polite tip of his hat. He wore his usual uniform, a khaki shirt, dark slacks, and a badge gleaming on his chest. His gaze settled on Amelia, compassion and professionalism mingling in his expression. "Ma'am," he greeted, holding out his hand. She shook it, though her palms were damp with nerves. He set down a slim folder on the coffee table. "Let's sit. I'll walk you through the statement. After that, we'll handle the restraining order request." Amelia eased onto the couch, her parents and Claire lingering close. Sheriff Hendricks took a seat in the armchair, clicking open a pen. "Whenever you're ready, start from the beginning, when you married him, how the abuse began, the escalation, and how you left." "I need as many details as you can recall, no matter how small." Her throat went dry, but she began to speak, voice barely above a whisper. She recounted the early red flags, Jacob's jealousy, his endless criticisms. She described how insults turned into slaps, which turned into more severe beatings. She confessed to the deep shame that kept her from reaching out, then recounted that final night when June intervened. Sheriff Hendricks listened without interruption, scribbling notes. Occasionally he asked for a clarification, where it happened, how recently, whether neighbors ever seemed to notice. Amelia answered as best she could. Tears blurred her vision, but she pressed on, determined to tell the unvarnished truth. When she finished, the sheriff offered her a box of tissues, letting her take a moment to collect herself. Then he slid a few forms across the table. "These are for the restraining order," he said gently. "Sign where indicated, and I'll file them as soon as I get back to the station. A judge can usually approve a temporary order quickly. It might require a hearing later, but for now it'll put legal distance between you and him." Amelia's hand trembled as she picked up the pen. She glanced at her father, whose eyes glistened with fierce pride. Claire stood behind the couch, one hand resting lightly on Amelia's shoulder, as if to anchor her. Carefully, Amelia scrawled her name on each line, finalizing the decision she'd agonized over for days. Once done, she exhaled shakily, a strange mixture of empowerment and exhaustion washing over her. "Thank you," she murmured. "What now?" Sheriff Hendricks gathered the papers. "I'll process these right away. We'll also need to locate Mr. Walker to serve him with the order. The moment he's served, he'll be legally obligated to keep away from you, your family, and this property. If he violates that order, we can arrest him." Amelia's stomach knotted at the thought of Jacob receiving that paperwork. Would it set off his temper even more? She bit her lip. "Is there any way to keep him from going berserk?" The sheriff's expression softened. "We can't control his reaction, but we can be prepared. I'll let my deputies know to increase patrols around this area, and if you see him or suspect he's nearby, you call us immediately. Don't hesitate." Her mother offered a firm nod. "We'll be vigilant." With that, the sheriff rose, tucking the documents into his folder. Amelia stood as well, feeling wobbly on her feet. He gave her a respectful incline of his head. "I'm proud of you for doing this. It's not easy, but it's the right step." She managed a small, grateful smile. "Thank you, Sheriff," she said. He waved farewell to the room, then her father escorted him outside. Through the window, Amelia watched them talk briefly on the porch before the sheriff returned to his cruiser. A swirl of relief and anxiety churned in her stomach. She'd taken a major step toward shielding herself from Jacob, but a piece of her remained on edge, braced for an inevitable backlash. Claire guided Amelia back onto the couch, slipping an arm around her shoulders. "Breathe," she whispered. "That was brave." A thick lump clogged Amelia's throat. She took a few uneven breaths, letting the magnitude of her actions sink in. She'd never envisioned standing up for herself so formally. At last, she'd laid bare what Jacob had done. The system would have records of his abuse. If he tried to deny it, they'd have her sworn statement. And maybe that was the leverage she needed to stop doubting her own memories. Her father re-entered, meeting Amelia's gaze with a grave nod. "It's done," he said. "We'll keep watch. You're not alone." Amelia gazed around the modest living room, heart churning with gratitude. Then her attention drifted to the window. Outside, beyond the yard, lay the open fields and the barn housing June. She pictured the mare's quiet strength once more, remembering how that single act of defiance had jolted her into action. In the hush that followed the sheriff's departure, Amelia realized she could finally breathe without feeling trapped in a box of fear. It wasn't total freedom yet, but it was a start, a beam of light in the dark corridor she'd navigated for too long. The rest of the day passed in cautious quiet, as though the ranch itself was holding its breath in anticipation. Amelia's parents busied themselves with typical chores, feeding horses, repairing fences, preparing for the next day's tasks. Yet every so often, one of them would glance out the window or drift into the kitchen to check on her. Claire remained close, too, stepping in when the weight of memory pressed too heavily on Amelia's shoulders. Together, they found small distractions, chatting about old times, browsing through family photo albums, and concocting a simple dessert from whatever ingredients they could scrounge in the pantry. But always, beneath the surface, a certain wariness lingered, a knowledge that Jacob might still arrive, determined to defy the restraining order that had been set in motion. Amelia oscillated between relief at having taken action and dread at imagining Jacob's reaction. She caught herself flinching at the sound of a distant engine or the slam of a truck door. Yet the hours slipped by without incident. By mid-afternoon, the sheriff called to confirm that the paperwork had been filed, though Jacob himself hadn't yet been located. Amelia's father thanked the sheriff and hung up with a measured calm, but his clenched jaw betrayed his frustration. When Amelia tried to apologize for the tension her situation had caused, he shook his head firmly, reminding her that none of this was her fault. Toward sunset, Amelia wandered out to the barn, seeking solace in June's quiet company. The mare greeted her with a gentle nicker, ears pricked forward in welcome. Soft golden light filtered through the barn's open doors, illuminating the dust motes that danced in the air. As Amelia approached the stall, she couldn't help recalling that terrifying night when June had placed herself between Amelia and Jacob's raised fist. The memory still sent a tremor of panic through her, but it was tempered by admiration for June's unwavering loyalty. Stroking the mare's neck, she felt a profound gratitude for the creature that had risked harm to protect her. She decided to take June for a short ride around the pasture, a simple loop to remind them both of calmer days. The routine of saddling up and adjusting the bridle soothed her nerves. Once astride the mare, Amelia directed June out into the open field, where the tall grass bowed in soft waves under a light breeze. The sky was painted in lavender and orange, reminiscent of the hopes she once had when she and Jacob first bought their own farm. A pang of regret flickered inside her, but it was quickly replaced by the gentle rhythm of June's steady gait. Each hoofbeat felt like a step away from the life she was leaving behind. Her father watched from the fence, arms folded, pride and concern mingling on his face. Claire stood beside him, offering an occasional wave. Amelia circled the pasture, drawing on the sense of calm she used to feel in her youth when the ranch was her entire world and heartbreak seemed a distant concept. When she finally dismounted, breathless from the ride, she offered June a sweet carrot and led her back into the barn. With the mare safely in her stall, she headed to the house for supper, comforted by the knowledge that each hour passing without Jacob's appearance was another testament to her growing freedom. That evening, her parents prepared a simple meal of grilled vegetables and cornbread. The four of them ate on the porch, lanterns glowing softly against the encroaching darkness. The conversation was warm, focusing on small things, how the tomatoes in the garden were thriving, or the way the neighbor's new foal kept escaping its pasture. Amelia felt a twinge in her chest, realizing how rare such peaceful moments had been in her own marital home. She had once believed it normal for tension to choke every meal, for fear to overshadow the simplest interactions. When the plates were cleared and the lanterns burned low, Amelia's father brought out a bottle of lemonade he'd pressed from their citrus trees. He poured each of them a glass, raising his in a quiet toast. "To Amelia," he said softly, "for having the courage to come home, for surviving what no one should have to endure." Tears pricked at Amelia's eyes. She tried to speak, but found her throat too tight. She simply touched her glass to his, breathing in the solidarity of her family and friend. Night settled with a shimmering blanket of stars. While Claire went inside to call her own parents, Amelia and her mother strolled the yard, the grass cool under their feet. Frogs croaked in a distant pond, and lightning bugs flickered near the old oak tree. Amelia brushed a hand over her cheek, feeling the faint bruise that had nearly faded, like a lingering echo of Jacob's cruelty. She braced herself, before asking the question that had been haunting her all day. "Mom, am I doing the right thing? Filing that restraining order, staying here, waiting for him to lash out?" Her mother's expression was pained. "Honey, there's no perfect path out of a mess like this. But you're standing up for yourself. You're safe with us. You're taking legal steps to protect yourself, and you're giving yourself time to heal. There's courage in that, even if it's scary." A tear slid down Amelia's cheek. "I guess I just feel guilty somehow. Like maybe I could have fixed him or done more to stop this escalation." Her mother wrapped an arm around her shoulders, guiding her closer under the moon's gentle glow. "That's not your responsibility. People can't be fixed by those they hurt. He made his choices, and now you're making yours to save yourself." The conviction in her voice resonated through the night, lending Amelia a new spark of hope. Shortly after they returned to the porch, Claire emerged, an encouraging smile on her face. "My folks say hi and that they're sending lots of love," she said, stifling a yawn. The day had been long, fraught with emotional weight for all of them. Amelia gestured toward the stairs, leading to the second floor. "Why don't we turn in? Tomorrow's another day, and who knows what it'll bring." They parted with soft goodnights. Amelia climbed the staircase, the old floorboards creaking in a familiar rhythm. In her childhood bedroom, she changed into comfortable pajamas and settled into bed, the worn quilt pulled snugly around her. Thoughts tumbled, but weariness soon overpowered them. She drifted into a dreamless sleep, lulled by the faint hush of the ranch at rest. When morning broke, a pale dawn light filtered through her curtains. Amelia rose, dressed in the same jeans and flannel shirt she'd worn the day before, then headed down for coffee. She found Claire in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with a bemused expression. "Your dad's out front," Claire said softly, nodding toward the window. "He says a deputy's pulled into the driveway." Fear seized Amelia's stomach. She rushed to the window in time to see her father talking to a uniformed deputy. The conversation seemed calm, but tension vibrated through Amelia's limbs. Was Jacob here, on the property? She braced for disaster, yet as the deputy walked toward the house, her father waved for Amelia to join them. She pushed open the screen door, heart pounding. "Ma'am," the deputy greeted politely, touching the brim of his hat. "I'm Deputy Hayes. Sheriff Hendricks asked me to stop by and let you know we served the restraining order to Mr. Walker early this morning." Relief and anxiety warred in Amelia's chest. "He didn't react violently, did he?" she asked, voice thin. Deputy Hayes shook his head. "He wasn't happy, but he didn't resist. He took the papers and left in his truck." "That was about an hour ago. I just wanted you to know it's official, and if he violates the order, we'll arrest him. Here's my card." He handed her a simple business card. "Call us if you see him or if he tries anything." Amelia grasped the card, exhaling shakily. "Thank you," she managed. Her father rested a protective hand on her shoulder. The deputy gave a curt nod, then strode back to his cruiser. The quiet of the ranch settled once more, broken only by a distant bird call. The weight of finality pressed against Amelia's thoughts. Jacob had the restraining order in hand. Legally, he was bound to keep his distance, but she knew how rage could blind him to consequences. Still, a kernel of strength sparked within her. She wasn't alone. She had her parents, Claire, the authorities, and most of all, her own renewed sense of self-preservation. She turned to her father, voice quivering with residual fear. "He won't just disappear, will he?" Her father's expression was grim yet resolute. "No, sweetheart, but at least now, if he tries anything, the law's on your side. You're no longer isolated. You have help." Amelia swallowed the knot of emotion in her throat. "Thank you for believing me, for not blaming me." He wrapped her in a hug, whispering, "There's never been any question of blame. All I want is for you to be safe and happy." Tears pricked her eyes. She blinked them away, raising her gaze to the barn across the yard. She remembered the moment June had stepped between her and Jacob's fist, the raw courage in that gentle creature's eyes. If a horse could find the bravery to protect someone she loved, Amelia told herself, then surely Amelia could muster the will to fight for her own peace. The future remained hazy, riddled with legal proceedings and the potential for Jacob's retaliation. But as she walked back into the house, flanked by her father and Claire, she felt newly grounded. The horizon might hold further challenges, but it also promised hope she hadn't dared to imagine. Inside, her mother was waiting with steaming mugs of tea, as though anticipating the intense emotions swirling through the morning air. They all settled around the kitchen table, silent for a moment, until Claire asked softly, "How do you feel?" Amelia took a measured breath. "Scared," she admitted, "and relieved, and proud of myself, I think. I'm proud I did something." A faint smile curved her lips. Though her heart still trembled with remnants of past fear, she let the warmth of her family's presence reassure her. On the porch, the sunlight fell across a small photograph of her and June tucked behind an old flower vase. Amelia realized she had reclaimed more than just her safety. She'd reclaimed her voice. There was no guarantee Jacob would never try to contact her, but she no longer lived under his power. She was home, surrounded by love, and at last free to imagine a life shaped by courage instead of fear.